A listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, neo-Nazi group the National Socialist Network has announced it's disbanding ahead of the proposed crackdown on hate speech laws by the federal government. But there are concerns it won't stop the influence nor power of the well-organised extremist group. If anything, it may supercharge it. We'll speak with an expert in just a moment. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Thursday, the 15th of January. The federal government's hate speech bill appears to be on shaky ground, with both the Greens and Coalition refusing to back it in its current form. There are concerns the proposed overhaul is an attack on free speech and civil rights. Meantime, Greens Senator David Shoebridge says the legislation needs to go further to include all marginalised groups.
Everybody needs protection. The same hateful ideology that was directed against the Jewish community at Bondi could have as easily been directed against women in positions of power or the LGBTIQ community.
Jewish leaders have urged the coalition to work on amendments rather than rejecting the bill outright. Now to the US, where there's been another shooting by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. The Department of Homeland Security says an illegal alien from Venezuela fled a traffic stop and crashed his car before attempting to flee the scene. There are reports officers tried to apprehend the man before being attacked by bystanders. The officer then fired a non-fatal shot, which hit the man in the leg. The latest incident comes just a week after ICE agent Jonathan Ross shot dead 37-year-old mother Renee Good in her car. And authorities in Canberra are investigating after 11 explosive devices were found in the city's northwest. Several pipe bombs were discovered near footpaths in Belconnen, prompting a public alert. ACT police say some of the devices had already been detonated while others had not, but there have been no reports of any injuries or property damage. Here is Acting Detective Inspector Anna Ronsky.
Any explosive is dangerous. That's why we are taking it so seriously. An explosive in a public place does raise a lot of concern for police. Some of the items that have been located have been detonated prior to police locating them, and some have not yet detonated. So they are explosives, and that is why we are treating it so seriously.
Authorities stress the incidents are not being treated as terrorism, but are urging anyone who finds a suspicious object not to touch it and to call 000 immediately. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the disbanding of Australia's largest neo-Nazi group. The NSN announced to its supporters it would shut down this weekend ahead of the federal government's new hate speech laws being debated in Parliament next week. The Prime Minister has already flagged the network would be branded a prohibited hate group under the proposed changes. Far-right extremism researcher Dr Kaz Ross joins us for her analysis, warning this is not the end, saying the government's crackdown may only fuel more anger and unity among the very well-organised extremists and their growing number of dedicated followers. Kaz, thanks so much for joining us. As we know, yesterday the National Socialist Network announced that it will disband in response to these proposed new hate speech laws by the Albanese government. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that they're genuine. They've decided to disband not just their activist wing, which is the NSN National Socialist Network, but all their associated activities, such as the White Australia Project and the White Australia Party. They were just about to submit 1,500 signatures to the AEC to be registered as a political party, and they've decided not to do that. So they're disbanding all of their activities, including what they call the European Australian movement. This was sort of a group for supporters. They would turn up to barbecues and seminars, but they wouldn't run around the streets dressed in black with masks on. So the fact that they've disbanded all of their activities indicates to me that they're very, very serious. They understand from the legislation there's no wiggle room here. There's no way you can just change your name and voila, there you are back on the streets. So they're taking it very seriously. They're trying to get in before any of them are designated as part of a hate group, clearly because they want to keep the future clear for future endeavours.
So talking about future endeavours, Kaz, there are a number of people that are concerned they're a bit sceptical about this group disbanding, saying they may just reform under another name or even that it may push them underground. Is that more of a concerning situation?
So let's take those two things separately. The first, that they may reform. It's worth noting that this group was formed by lifers. These are people who are in it for life. They're never going to give up. So once we accept that there is a core group of lifers, we can see that over the last 3 years, in particular the last 1 year, they've added quite a few people to that group of lifers. These are people who are very committed and will remain committed. They truly believe in their mission and they believe that they are saving Australia. They've been getting a bit more public support from the so-called freedom movement, which we could see at March for Australia, which happened in August last year and is going to happen again on Australia Day. So they feel that the people are behind them, they're committed, they're lifers. They'll be back 100% for sure. Whether all of them will be back, that's another question. For a number of people, they might say, look, it was great while it lasted, but, I don't want to risk getting arrested, so I'm out. So I think that the lifers will definitely be back. They've been doing this for quite a few years. If we think back to Reclaim Australia, which was an anti-Islam movement, started off as a sort of a populist mums and dads movement taken over by neo-Nazis. Out of that, they formed United Patriots Front. That ended up falling apart basically through legal pressure as well as getting deplatformed. So Facebook cut off their Facebook group and that was the end of them. So then Tom Sewell reformed under a new group, the Lads Society, which you'll remember infiltrated the Young Nationals political party in 2018 in New South Wales. That was discovered, revealed, the group eventually fell apart. So this is the third go-around for them as this particular model. And the model's been very, very successful. It's called an active club model, which comprises of two parts. The first is tribe, the second is train. So tribe is create a community. And this group have realised that they have to make a community. They can't just rely on Facebook likes. So they've been making communities in real life, meeting up, having picnics, starting up a little mother's auxiliary, things like that. So that's the tribe part of it. The train part of it is working out together, preferably twice a week, but minimum once a month. These are the rules for being a member. So they've got a bunch of men that are training to fight, kickboxing, weightlifting, getting fit, and then they've got a community sort of built up around that to support it. It's a very successful model for attracting people. So that model, it's pretty hard to do that if you go underground. At the moment, they're training in public parks. So people may have, when you go out for your Saturday or Sunday walk through the park, you may have walked past them and not known that it was them. Very hard for them to do that undercover. So I think that the idea that the group's going to go underground is a misreading of the situation. I think what we'll see is the leadership of the group will pull back and gather their resources and then think of a new strategy. And there are models out there in Europe which they could use to get around this particular hate group designation.
So in regards to the federal government, Kaz, with Anthony Albanese coming with the overhaul of hate speech laws and also gun laws, it was to crack down on extremist groups and to stop people spreading hate and threatening behaviour. Do you think these will work? Because we know straight away today the opposition leader, Susan Lee, says she will not back these new laws.
Yeah, look, I feel that there's a bit of politics being played here, to use that, well-worn phrase, given that the opposition was calling for crackdown on anti-Semitism and an immediate response after the tragic Bondi event. I think that the difficulty that we have in Australia is we've got a mishmash of laws relating to racial discrimination and hate speech. Because we have this convoluted federal and state-based system, from my observation, I'm constantly shocked why lots of people in the NSN and in their sort of follower group haven't been charged with hate speech crimes, because it seems to me there are adequate laws on the books for doing that. Yet what we find is when Tom Sewell was charged with offensive behaviour for running around the Victorian country town of Ballarat, yelling Australia for the white man, the rest must go. The local magistrate said that didn't meet the criteria for offensive behaviour. So it seems to me that we need some kind of rectification of the laws that we have already regarding offensive behaviour, hate speech and hate actions, plus the symbols, the hate symbols. We need some kind of way of making it consistent across the whole country and helping people understand what's in and what's out. The other issue, of course, is the social media platforms, particularly X. Since Musk took over, there's no moderation. People are wild on there. You can go on an Australian Twitter space, X space, any night of the week, and you will hear people just going on and on and on with hate speech. Completely uncensored, completely unfiltered or unfettered. And so I think we've got a mismatch where people think, well, I can say whatever I like on X, so why can't I say whatever I like on Facebook or in public or whatever? So we've got an issue there where we've got one platform which is just a hate fest and people thinking that that's what free speech actually is. So in terms of this group, they've made a pretty big effort to stay what they would say is within the law. They say that they're not a violent group. I beg to differ. Many of them are facing charges for violent actions, including the leadership. So they say that they're not a violent group. They say they always work within the law. But some of the banners that they've had, ever since they took a political turn about 2.5 years ago, some of their banners are just totally offensive and they've never been charged for them until in the last 6 months or so. So I think this group, their aim is to just keep pushing the discourse and pushing that kind of, maybe your One Nation voter or someone a bit to the right of One Nation, pushing them further and further and further along to the right. And we see their success. For example, the term remigration, which is code for deport or kill all non-white people from Australia. I see that all the time now. People are just using it like it's a legitimate expression. And that was a term that was introduced by the neo-Nazis and fostered and pushed by the neo-Nazis.
Kaz, you make a great point because we see these actions from the federal government to try and crack down on this behaviour by some of these extremist groups. But you make an excellent point that social media, there is no accountability there, and especially with the algorithm, how much is that playing in to the huge problem we have right across the world right now?
Yeah, definitely. That is really a core factor. This is how the neo-Nazis are managing to spread their message and to get their point of view accepted into groups that maybe 3 or 4 years ago they might have been out on the streets protesting against COVID restrictions, and now they're joking about how they're going to pile people up on the beach and machine gun them as part of the remigration process. That process of radicalisation has only happened through social media. So the neo-Nazis, people say, oh, they're all idiots and, they've got low IQ. That's not actually true. They're extremely strategic. They know how to pull stunts that get media attention. So then they can portray themselves as the saviours of Australia, these brave and courageous men that are standing up to a tyrannical government. And so anybody who's got a beef with the federal government is going to go, oh, yeah, okay, they're standing up for me. And how have they got that message out? Through social media.
Kaz, we know not only the influence of social media, but a lot of younger people that if they have been radicalised by these groups that are, in many circumstances, they're often isolated from friends and family.
This is a really big concern. We see with this group that when 15-year-olds or 16 or 17-year-olds join and their parents find out and they don't like it, the group's advice is leave home, leave school, come and join us, we'll get you a job. And that's happened in many, many cases. So these are very young people. They've become part of the group. They might be living with other members of the group, working with other members of the group, and they have no other social supports. So when the group disbands, there's no one for them to turn to. At the same time, they will become known as an ex-Nazi, hard to form new friendships where people accept them for being an ex-Nazi or even a current Nazi. So we have a risk of young people becoming very, very alienated. And at the same time, we can see with this group, the NSN, that they say, oh, we don't advocate for terrorism. However, they radicalise the people around them. And we've seen in many of the mass shootings in the US that it wasn't members of a particular far-right group that did a mass shooting. It was someone who was following them and then just couldn't stand it anymore and said, oh, somebody's got to do something, and went out and shot up a mosque or a synagogue or a school. So I think it is really concerning that the successful community building of the NSN, once the NSN is forced to disband, remains actually a threat to overall society.
And we understand there's been a couple of developments this afternoon, Kaz, regarding more opposition and possible legal action against the federal government's proposed hate speech laws. What do you know?
So I think we've all seen this week that quite a few voices are coming up from the left, from the right, from NGOs, from human rights groups, expressing great concern about some of the provisions in the proposed bill. Of course, the neo-Nazis themselves are very against the bill because it's dissolved their extremely successful organisation. So Thomas Sewell said today that he has been reaching out to top legal firms to get some advice. Would they be prepared to take a challenge to the laws if they go through? So he's already raised, in the first hour, he raised about $30,000. I believe because of the nature of these laws and the way it's being framed, the opposition is framing it as, free speech laws and we're losing our freedoms and so on and so forth, that he will get widespread support and no doubt will earn enough money to initiate a challenge.
Do you think there is the chance that there will be a legal challenge with this case?
Oh, definitely. I'm not sure, however, not being a legal scholar, I'm not sure if he needs to be charged first under the law, then he can challenge it. But I know that's the model that they took with the Hitler salute. When the Hitler salute was banned, they made a decision that they would challenge it. And Jacob Hersant was the one who did a Hitler salute and was charged. He's then been found guilty, which he's challenging. He's appealing that, and they're prepared to go to the High Court to win back the swastika, the Hitler salute, and in this case to repeal the new bill if it gets through.
Will certainly be a very interesting few days and weeks ahead. We appreciate your time as always. Thanks, Kaz.
You're very welcome.
That was far-right extremist researcher Dr Kaz Ross. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning with a deep dive on Timothée Chalamet's new film, Marty Supreme. And we'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.